Well, hi there. So in this video, we're going to do a little bit of extra practice with all the different kinds of elasticities. So let's get started. So our first question says that assume the price goes down from 20 to 12, which is a little bit hard to see, but it's right above my head there. And so it's going to go on the demand, price elasticity of demand. It's going to go from, what do we got here, 20 quantity to 24. So I'm kind of just identifying like what my numbers that I'm going to be are. I am going to have to do a percent change, right? So we have percent change in the quantity over the percent change in the price. And I am, excuse me, I am dealing with price elasticity of demand. So these are going to be the quantity demanded. Now, the new value is going to be the 24 minus the old over the 20. That's the old. And that's just going 24 to 20, right? The price change is from 20 to 12. So the new value is 12 minus the 20 over the 20. And so then I can simplify and say 24 minus 20 is 4 over 20. 4 over 20 is 1/5. I divide that by 12 minus 20 is 8 over 20 is 4/5. Now, a little trick here, maybe some of you know it, maybe some of you don't, but if you take this 4/5 and you actually multiply it 5 times 4 as its reciprocal over 1/5, you can actually solve this problem that way. And so that's how we actually get a fraction out like that. And so 5 times 1 is equal to 5, and 4 times 5 is 20. And so 5/20 is, I'm running out of space, 0.25. 0.25, and that's our price elasticity of demand. So on a test, I probably would have actually myself just kind of written out this first part and then gotten us down to 5/4 times 1/5, or even 5 over 20 or something, to just show that I was kind of doing that work. Because it is less than 1, we would say it is relatively, right? And we're talking about the demand here, relatively inelastic. And that should be relatively obvious because it's the relatively at the end of the demand curve. This end, because remember, this end of a demand curve is more elastic. And so we can say because 0.25 is less than 1. Now let's take a look at number 2. The table gives the quantity of good X and supplied at various prices, demand when we go from 30 to 20. So when we go from 30 to 20, that's going to be our price change. So 20 is the new, minus 30 is the old 30. What's happening to the quantity? We go from 1 to 3. So the new value is 3 minus 1 over 1. And so 2 over 1 is just 2. And then here we've got 10 over 30. So that's 1/3. And so 2, so we have 3 over, well, that's just 3 times 2 is equal to 6. And so 6.0. So we can say therefore, right? So our PED is 6.0, therefore relatively elastic. And again, how did I know it was elastic? Well, because 6 is bigger than 1. Now, is supply relatively elastic, blah, 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 when the price goes from 30 to 20? So it's the same question that's asking about supply. Let's take a look. Supplied, 3, 3, 3, 3. It doesn't change. So that means that it's perfectly inelastic, and we can explain it as because quantity supplied is always 3 regardless of the price. And so we don't actually have to do any calculating at that point. We just say, well, it's going to be that vertical line. Assume the income elasticity of demand is -2. So that's telling us right there it's an inferior good. Well, using a correctly labeled graph of the market for good Y, show the effect of a significant increase in the income on the price of good Y in the short run. So we're going to do a supply and demand graph like it asks, supply and demand. And if I say that there's an increase in income, therefore, right, and it's inferior, and I know it's inferior because the IED is less than 0, we can say because it's inferior and income is going up, I'd say therefore demand decreases. How do I show that? Well, I show it as a leftward shift. It did ask me to show the effect on the price. And so I'm going to need to go to the dashes here, put a little P star and a P sub 1 and show that the price went down. So the price of this good would fall as a consequence of the higher incomes. D, suppose instead the price of good H decreases by 3, Zelda by 6% more H, and 2% less of Z. Based on this change, identify whether H and Z are substitutes, complements, or not related. Explain with numbers. So I'm given the price of good H, the quantity of good H, and the quantity of good Z. And if I'm trying to determine the relationship of them, I'm going to use percent change in the quantity of one good divided by the percent change in the price of another good. Now, I'm only given the quantity for good Z. I'm not given the change in price. So I'm going to have to put good Z in the numerator. And so we're going to say 2% less of Z, quantity, right, of Z, in a consequence of the lower 3% price of good, what is this, H, right? And so we have a negative, or sorry, that's a positive 0.67. It's a negative over a negative, so it's a positive value. And so this positive number indicates that they are substitutes. And so really by calculating all this out, the cross price elasticity of demand, I am noting that they are substitutes because a positive is a substitute. All right, let's take a look at, here, I'll give you a chance to kind of read that. Because it's substitute CPD, positive 0.267. Let's take a look at these multiple choice questions. Assume that a demand for bottled water is relatively price elastic. I'm going to zoom in just a shade here because I know these are slightly smaller. And hopefully my good camera keeps up with us, right? They got me a new camera. So we've got price elastic demand. An increase in the supply of bottled water will result in which of the following. And so for this one, if I know there's an increase in the supply, I can say that the price will fall. Therefore, there would be a decrease in the price. And if I know that it's elastic, so I'm going opposite directions, I should expect that, let's see, a decrease in price. Well, we do know that that's true, and a decrease in price. And then we've got decreased total revenue. Well, I know if it's elastic, and it tells me that, we're going opposite ways. So the price is going down. That must mean that total revenue is rising. Option A. 2, 10% increase in X results in 20% decrease in Y. Which of the following is true? So I know that there's kind of the negative 20 over positive 10. So that's a negative 2. And that means if it's a negative value with cross price elasticity of demand is what I'm doing here, that they are complement goods. And the cross price, no, it's not negative 0.5. No, it's not, right? The quantity is going in the numerator. So let's look for another one. We know they're not substitutes. Complement goods, negative 2. There we go. C, right? So we knew that they were complements because it's a negative value, and we went ahead and calculated it. 3, if the price elasticity supply of pickles is 2, price of pickles, I don't know why pickles, 10% quantity supplied. So we know that that's just going to be 20. It's the number that's over, right? Because 2.0 equals X over positive 10. So we know the quantity supplied would be increasing by 20%. Number 4, moving from left to right along a downward sloping demand curve. So we're kind of moving from that way. Makes price elasticity do what? Well, we know that the first one is going to be really elastic and it's going to become more inelastic. So first elastic, then uninelastic, then finally inelastic, which is going to be our corresponding correct answer. D, that midpoint, remember, is that uninelastic point. Number 5, if a 10% increase in the price of a good leads to 25% decrease in the quantity demanded, then demand, well, we've got 25 over 10. That's equal to 2.5. That's bigger than 1. So we know it's relatively elastic. B, because it's bigger than 1. Number 6, which the following is true in the elastic range of a firm's demand curve. So this one's a little tricky. If we talk about profits, we haven't done that yet. Talk about costs, we haven't done that yet. Lower price will lead to an increase in total revenue. Let's test this one out. If we know that we're in the elastic range, we have price going down, total revenue going up. That is true, right? So the total revenue test of elasticity comes to the rescue there, C. 7, a 10% increase in Sandra's income causes Sandra's consumption to decrease from 10 to 6. So she has more income, but actually she's buying less milk. So that actually means that her income elasticity is negative. So we're going to say less than 0. So we're down to C or D. And because she's buying less, that's weird. When I say weird, that's because milk is typically a normal good, but the fact that she's buying less makes it an inferior good for her, D. Well, number 8, following a decrease in the supply of oranges, price of orange juice went up 20%, 10% increase in the quantity of apple juice consumed. So here we've got a positive 10% OJ price, and we know that there's a positive 10% apple juice quantity. And so we imply here that there is a positive 0.5. And what do we got? Here we go, B, right answer. We also know based on that they are substitutes. Number 9, which is the price elasticity of supply between 3 and 4 in the graph below. So we're increasing from 3 to 4, and we're increasing from 10 to 15. And so we kind of look at this and we go, well, what's happening? We can actually do the percent changes, which that's a little bit more work. We have 4 minus 3 over 3, which is equal to 1/3, and that's going to be in our denominator. Then going from quantity 10 to 15, that's 15 minus 10 over 10. So that's 5 over 10. So we have 3 times 1/2 is equal to 1.5. So that's bigger than 1. There's another way that we could have done this, right? Thinking just through about like what's going on here. The price went up, and the ratio of what that price went up, 3 to 4, is different from this if we said 10 to 15. This is a 50% increase here. This is a 33% increase here. So the quantity response was larger by proportion than the price. So we could go through and solve this and say like it's 1.5, but you can see that's a lot of work that I just did. And I did it pretty quickly because I know how to do them fast. But you could also just look at the numbers and see the quantity percent change. It's a larger proportion than the change in price. So I know it has to be greater than 1. And if I know that it's greater than 1, it's elastic, I could just get to the right answer by just kind of looking at the relationships of these numbers. But 1.5 is the correct answer for it. Number 10, the quantity of peanuts supplied increased from 40 tons per week to 60 tons per week when the price of peanuts went from 4 to 5. This is another one where if you kind of just observe, here we went from 40 to 60, that's a 50% increase. When you go from 4 to 5, that's not a 50% increase, right? So the quantity response is larger than what the price response is. So I would say that the price elasticity of supply is relatively elastic. It's not perfectly elastic. It's not an infinite response, but it's relatively elastic. So option A. Again, we could go through that process and calculate it, but you really don't need to be able to answer that. All right. So hopefully this helped you with multiple choice in the practice on 2.1 demand and elasticity. I'll see you next time.